Welcome to the Sharpening Stone, where we hone the skills to cut off toxic relationships and carve out a better future. I'm David. In this video, we're going to talk about self-talk, where it comes from, the harm it can do, the good it can do, and how to swap out negative self-talk for positive self-talk that can help you achieve what you want to achieve. So if you're ready, let's get to sharpening.
Yeah, I can.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about self-talk, and we all do it. Everybody does. There's the running joke. It's okay to talk with yourself, just get as long as you don't answer yourself. But we do answer ourselves. That's part of the whole process. So who do you say that I am? A lot of times our self-talk is really in the second person. Each person may have their own experience. From my experience, I'm usually talking to myself as you, as if I'm outside of myself talking in. What we're going to cover today is where does the self-talk come from? What causes it and how did it get started? How does it work and what does it do? It's a tool, like so many things that our body and our minds and our nervous system do for our benefit, and it can be used against us or for us. We're going to talk a little bit about both of those things today. And then harnessing the power of self-talk, getting into how we can take control of it and instead of steering us off track, using it to keep on target, on point for what we're aiming for. So where does it come from? Well, it comes from our earliest childhood. We learn language by hearing the people around us talking to us, talking around us. And so we pick up on those things, and it becomes the voice of our inner thoughts and feelings and beliefs. So sometimes we'll hear our self-talk, our inner monologue, and it'll sound maybe a little strange to us. And that's because it can be us remembering what other people have said to us. And at some point, when it's a toxic person or a toxic relationship or a narcissistically abusive one, and it's repeated often enough, that complex trauma, that repeated wounding, can cause us to adopt that other person's voice and their words and speak to ourselves that way. And that's when we kind of take over with all the berating and belittling and even cussing ourselves out. Things that we would never say to anyone else, but yet our inner monologue or inner dialogue is saying those things to us. It's not entirely our fault. Our self-talk, like I said, we do pick it up from how our parents or caregivers and other siblings and authority figures around us spoke to us when we were little. When we're younger, I think up till about 7 years old, our brains are really operating in a kind of a hypnotic state and kind of a theta wave state. So anything that happens to us, anything that's spoken to us, any suggestions, implications, connotations, that really goes straight into our subconscious, and our subconscious doesn't have a filter. It just says, okay, I believe that. Okay, I got to make that happen. That's the truth. It's our conscious mind, our prefrontal cortex, where the analysis happens, and that's where the filtration happens. And when we're younger, we just don't really have that. So the environment that we grow up in really does shape that self-talk dramatically. And until we're older and have that um, prefrontal cortex, the conscious mind more fully developed, it takes until then before we can really start recognizing, hey, this is not helping me, this is hurting me. I don't like it, I want to change it. But then the question is, how? What do we do? Also comes from the cultural messages around us. It's not just the authority figures in our life, but anything that we see on TV, hear in the radio, cultural events, things that happen, holidays, celebrations. We pick up on all the sentiment, all the verbal and nonverbal cues. It goes right into our subconscious, and our inner talk, our inner monologue, gives voice to that as we learn language and find words to describe things. So sometimes our self-talk will even come from a place that we don't even recognize, because what we were exposed to was before we had the language for it. And at some point we got the language for it. And now our inner dialogue is expressing those hidden things with the language that we now have. So how does it work? Self-talk, and what does it do? Well, self-talk is, like I said, an expression of our inner thoughts and feelings and beliefs. This is really important because our beliefs at a subconscious level are going to determine um, how we behave, how we speak, how we interact with ourselves and with other people. Those beliefs will help shape our perception of our experiences. Um, for example, if when we're younger, we're treated like a burden because our family doesn't have a lot of resources, and we're one more mouth to feed, one more body to clothe, one more everything. That kind of talk and those kind of stresses and conflicts that happen in the family while we're still too young to even know what's going on can imbue in us that the belief that we're a burden, that we're not worthy, that we're undeserving, or and our self-talk can then reflect that when we do get the words to express it, and not even knowing where it comes from, we can feel like that's just the way it's always been. Because for us, maybe it has, or maybe since before we knew any differently. Now, that's on the negative side. On the positive side, what self-talk can do is it can direct our subconscious to believe in our success, in our ability. And there's been research done with athletes that practice and athletes that visualize. And they found that an athlete who visualizes a better performance will actually have an improved performance over an athlete who only practices. They'll both practice at the same level with the same intensity, but the one who visualizes it and talks to themselves positively as if their achievement is already accomplished, they will perform much better and maybe even exceed that. An athlete who practices and has negative self-talk, they found, is far more likely to underperform, to have something go wrong at the last second, something inexplicable happen where their performance just is not what they practice at. The same for musicians. They've done these experiments with pianists, and pianists who envision playing their piece perfectly have just as good a performance as pianists who practice that piece more than they do. The same thing with the negative side. If they self-talk negatively or visualize negatively, even though they might practice perfectly, just before their performance will stumble. That's the power of the subconscious mind. And our self-talk is kind of like our own self-hypnosis to some degree. Nope. Now, our self-talk is also a useful tool for our emotional and physical responses to situations. Um, our self-talk can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, causing us to create a situation that didn't exist, both positively and negatively. Our self-talk does influence our beliefs and therefore our perception of what we experience, and that has real neurological and physiological effects. We can talk ourselves into, have you ever heard of, stirring yourself up into a tizzy, something like that? Um, we can self-talk ourselves to where our adrenaline spikes, our cortisol spikes, and now we're in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn state. We're in the limbic system. We can also self-talk ourselves out of that to some degree. Much more effectively is activating the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, to calm down the sympathetic nervous system. But self-talk can play a role in that, in persuading us that we're okay, we're safe, we're going to be okay. It's not as urgent as our body is feeling right now. We can take our time and step back and look into the situation and respond instead of react, and thus calming down the limbic system. That can be enough of a delay when we get triggered by a situation and start reacting to what that trigger is associated with us, that paired association that's inside of our minds. That can be enough of a delay to get us to where we can remember, okay, I can activate my vagus nerve. I can, squeeze my thumbs, do some tapping, even singing or humming, deep breathing, doing a double sigh. These sorts of things that will help activate our parasympathetic nervous system, calm us down, get us out of the emotional flashback, and back in control of how we're responding. So self-talk, a lot of times we come at it from the experience of it's just all bad, but it really is a tool that, depending on how we wield it, determines the effect that it has. Now, how do we harness this? Well, the first thing is to explore our self-talk without any judgment, with the curiosity of a child, to just explore it, to wonder about it, to make space for it, and to allow it to be okay, even if it's terribly negative. But instead of simply agreeing with it and going with it, it's not about agree or disagree, fighting it, trying to suppress it. The more we fight it, I think the saying is what we resist persists. The same with self-talk. When we take a little bit of time and explore it with curiosity, like, wow, that was a really harsh thing to say to myself. I wonder where that came from, or what's that about? Not necessarily building a story around it, but even asking if it's true, asking how that makes us feel, where that came from, um, what made our self-talk feel that it was necessary to say something like that. This kind of examination, we can even ask, who's ever talked to us like that before, exploring even deeper. Like, where I didn't start talking to myself like this. Somebody talked to me like this. And where did I pick that up? Is that my voice, or am I just repeating someone else's voice? Have I become the henchman to do someone else's dirty work of sabotaging me, of putting me down, of harassing and abusing myself? And then asking, is there anybody that I would ever want to talk to that way? When there's this negative self-talk, a lot of times we'll rip ourselves to shreds and say the most vile, hateful, hurtful things to ourselves, but then we would never say that to someone else. and slowing down to recognize, hey, I wouldn't talk to a young child like this, or somebody who needed help, or somebody I cared about. I wouldn't talk to them like that. Why am I talking to myself this way? And maybe not even why, but would it be possible for me to treat myself the same way I would treat other people? And that exploration, our subconscious, when we ask if it's possible or what it would look like, our subconscious is going to start spinning and go, yeah, what would that look like? And then it'll start making it real. Subconscious is a tricky thing. We've got to tell it directly, but give it the freedom to explore. Let's see. Am I repeating this same slide? Huh. I think no, I think I did, but maybe not. There's one thing I missed. Um, we can also explore with our self-talk to change it, not just to identify, okay, where is this negativity coming from? What's going on with that? But on the positive side, to change it is every habit that is against us, that's counterproductive. I don't want to say bad habits, but every habit that works against us, if we're going to replace it or stop it, we've got to put something in its place. With our self-talk, we can start asking, questions like, is this actually true about us? Or what is really true? That self-talk, how I'm so pathetic and can't do anything right. We've already asked the question, is that really true? Well, no, we've got evidence. We do some things right. So what is actually true about us? Maybe we're just as human as the next person, and we get some things right, we get some things wrong, and that's okay. We can improve on what we do well, and we can correct what we don't do so well with compassion for ourselves, just like we would have for somebody else. We can ask what we would want to feel about ourselves, or about whatever our self-talk is, telling us. Like, for example, after a social situation, I will frequently have this self-talk come up that starts criticizing something. It'll pick something out and say, oh, you offended people, you did this, you did that. And by asking myself, is that even true? Well, I don't know. Nobody said anything. What's actually true? Well, in the past, when the toxic people who I've been involved with have criticized me, it usually wasn't true. Nobody else thought anything about what they were beating me up over. So I can ask myself, um, what would I want to feel about what I said or did? Well, maybe nothing at all. Maybe feel proud about it because I shared something and um, gave a piece of myself, showed off my creativity or whatever. So I can choose how I want to feel about those things that the negative self-talk wants me to feel bad about. Uh, we can also ask, who would want to talk to us like that? Would anybody who is our friend, who cares about us, talk about us so negatively, or talk to us so negatively? Or would that only be an enemy? And who would be better to listen to? Somebody who is out to harm us, or somebody who has our best interests in mind? So we can start picking apart the self-talk and deciding which one we want to listen to, kind of separating it from the immediate emotion. And I don't want to say just analyzing it, because it's nearly impossible to analyze or logically think ourselves out of emotions. We really have to kind of feel our way out and change our beliefs. Now, with our self-talk, when we're in the throes and just it's coming down, all this time I've wasted, everything that's going on, we can ask ourselves too, what's one thing I'd like to change about my daily self-talk? And we don't have to say, okay, starting tomorrow, no more self-talk. I'm going to talk to myself perfectly. We can just take one thing and say, oh, I'm just going to notice when my self-talk gets negative. And that's enough. And maybe as we get more comfortable, we start noticing it, and that's more familiar, and it becomes easier and quicker. Maybe the next step, just the tiniest step, we could say, well, now I'm going to ask a question about that, whatever question I choose, like where did it come from, or is that even really true, or whatever question you want. And just take it one small step at a time. The key is to practice consistently challenging this negative self-talk each day. And if you miss a day and go a few days with, the self-talk just comes out and it's just tearing you up, when you get back on track and you come back to yourself and go, well, I just had a few days of just horrible self-talk. Don't let that be an excuse for the negative self-talk to kick back in and beat you up all the more. They say, okay, today's a new day. We're going to pick up starting from day one. I'll just notice the self-talk. I'll just ask a question. The smaller the habit, the smaller the change, consistently and persistently done over time, the larger the effects will be before you even know it. I've got an exercise going forward, and you can choose, this is a mission. You can choose to accept it or reject it as you wish. It's, and I'm going to post this somewhere. I've got to figure out where I'm going to post it. It'll probably be a link in the group where you can go and download this if you want. But that's it's a self-talk discovery and recovery exercise where each day for 7 days, you do a discovery exercise of writing down just one of your self-talk monologues. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, just a brief description of it. Excuse me. And I try to identify who first said that to you. Now, don't worry if you can't place a name or a face to it. It's okay. It's enough just to be curious. And if you don't know, just write down, I have no idea where this came from. And a short description, just a couple of words of how you feel about that particular self-talk in your monologue. And whatever it is, whether it's angry, resentful, bitter, anxious, fearful, whatever your feelings are, that's the discovery side. Now, the recovery side is each day after the discovery, write down the self-talk that you would rather hear instead of what that self-talk was that you experienced. If you could choose anything in your self-talk, what would you choose your self-talk to be instead of what it was? And just write that down, quick description. Identify who you'd want to hear that from. Maybe just from yourself. Maybe there's somebody that you would like to hear that from that has never said that or doesn't say that, or maybe they would be willing to, and you could approach them. It can be anybody you want. Just identify, kind of put a face to the self-talk, and then describe or imagine, describe how you would imagine feeling about that self-talk. How would this self-talk that you want to hear make you feel? Confident, accepted, loved, respected, treasured, honored, welcomed, whatever it might be. Each day you go through 7 days doing this and notice how your self-talk begins to change. And notice how you can start directing your self-talk instead of working against you, working for you. Hey, thank you for sharing this time with me. You're not alone. If you'd like to start or continue your recovery journey, I invite you to join us at the Sharpening Stone Coaching on meetup.com. We have 100% free narcissistic abuse and complex trauma recovery support group, and we'd love to see you there. It's a caring group of people. We've all been through experiences, and there's a lot of validation and wisdom sharing that goes on. Until then, whatever you decide, do what's best for you, and I wish you the best success in everything.